Which I want to walk through some quick points with you and then ask you to respond in more detail to some broader questions. You examined Operation Wide Receiver, which was during the Bush administration, and Operation Fast and Furious, which was during this administration. Is that right?
Correct. We looked at both of those matters.
In your report, you found that gunwalking occurred in both operations. Is that right?
That's correct.
We are not talking only about botched coordination efforts with Mexico. We're talking about ATF agents stopping surveillance in the United States and letting guns walk in both operations. Is that correct?
Correct.
In fact, your report said this, and I quote, Operation Wide Receiver was noteworthy because it informed our understanding of how these tactics were used by ATF more than 3 years before Operation Fast and Furious was initiated. End of quote. Is that what your report said?
That is.
Now, you also found that neither Attorney General McCasey nor Attorney General Holder authorized or approved gunwalking. Is that right?
That's correct, although I would note Attorney General McCasey was sworn in after the completion of Operation Wide Receiver's investigative portion of the activity.
So you also found that there were wiretap applications in both operations and that the wiretap applications in Wide Receiver included the same kinds of potential red flags you found in Fast and Furious affidavits. Is that correct?
We found red flags existing in Wide Receiver as well.
But Deputy Assistant Attorney Generals from both administrations did not routinely read these affidavits, according to your report. You interviewed officials from both administrations, and they told you their normal practice was to read only summary memos. Is that correct?
We interviewed 3 of the 5 deputy AAGs who reviewed the 14 wiretaps, and all of the 3 that we interviewed, I don't want to suggest.
I understand. I want you to just tell us what happened.
That all 3 indicated that they could not, they did not routinely read the affidavits when they came to them.
Clearly, I want to make it clear that I believe that we need to, there is reform, and I think your assistants mentioned this yesterday, and I'm sure the chairman would agree with me. We need to make sure folks read the affidavits. Would you agree?
I agree, and I actually formerly was a deputy AAG in the criminal division, so I'm 12 years out of date, but I remember reviewing them.
Now, for both operations, you also found that gunwalking was not ordered from the top, but instead was, and I quote, primarily the result of tactical and strategic decisions by the agents and prosecutors, end of quote. Is that right?
That's right.
You said in your testimony that ATF and U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona, and I quote, share equal responsibility for strategic and operational failures in Operations Wide Receiver and Fast and Furious. So here are my questions, and I think these questions will go to the heart of the reform that I hope that we will be able to get underway. How could these tactics have continued in Phoenix over a span of 5 years and 2 administrations without being stopped either by ATF or the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona? My second question is, how should it have worked? And if an ATF agent came to his superiors in Phoenix with this kind of plan today, how should it be examined and vetted now?
Well, as to the first question, I think there were a serious lack of controls in place in both the U.S. Attorney's Office and ATF operation, primarily ATF because they are the law enforcement agency that needs approval. We highlighted one of them as an example. Even though ATF for 8 years has been in the Department of Justice, the Attorney General guidelines for use of undercover operations were never amended to cover ATF. So there were a series of failures in the controls. We've made significant recommendations in that area. The Department and ATF have put in place additional tools and controls already, but there has to be a serious review and vetting of operations like this that impact not only the number of guns and the communities that are impacted by these, but that involve a foreign operation involving guns going to a foreign country. That wasn't there at the time. So there needs to be a serious look at that. And how to prevent that is, going forward, is watching carefully to make sure, in fact, the reforms we're all talking about aren't lost once the headlines of the reform, once the headlines of the report go away, that there's oversight, follow-up by the Inspector General's office, and I'm sure by the Congress in this regard.
Just one last question. It seems as if Mr. Melson, who was heading ATF, seems like, from reading the report, seems like he may have fallen asleep at the switch. I mean, would you? I mean, I mean, from what you saw, again, this is the head of ATF.
Right.
Can you tell us about what your report says about that?
Yes. We found in Operation Fast and Furious that there was significant information coming to ATF headquarters. In fact, by March of 2010, the Deputy Director of ATF, who was an experienced agent and had served in the ATF for a considerable period of time, for the first time in his career asked for an exit strategy because of his concern about what he had seen. He asked for it. It didn't come to headquarters for 6 weeks, and it wasn't reviewed by the Deputy Director until almost a year later, after the shooting of Agent Terry and after the indictment occurred. The fact that the Deputy Director could see the need for an exit strategy in March of 2010 and not receive it and review it until 2011, I think speaks volumes about what happened here in terms of failures of oversight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman.